This is a giant snail, and as a pack animal, it would be absolutely awful. But not everything you work with has to really make perfect sense. If you are world building, if you're putting something together that you're going to be potentially spending years playing with and enjoying and trying to unravel and unpack, you're going to have to do some things in that time period that are just for the sake of fun. And this is kind of one of them. You know, on the opposite page here, I was playing with similar ideas with crabs. And especially like this one, the idea of some like weird hermit, putting his, I just realized the overlap with hermit crab, but some like old weird hermit putting his hut on top of a crab that he's somewhat domesticated. That just seems hilarious to me. And you have to have some amount of those things in your world building just to kind of grab you. But the other side of it too is that that's kind of how our world works. Not everything makes perfect sense. There is an element of certain things exist because at some point somebody thought it would be funny, or maybe it wasn't funny when it was originally developed, but now we look at it in that light. And those kinds of things, those elements that add quirkiness to your world, are a really important thing, I think. I see this frequently in modern world building, especially like urban fantasy and stuff, where there's the inclusion of lots of pop culture references. I know that can probably seem a little bit cloying sometimes, but I think it actually makes a lot of sense. If you are building something that is in our world that has a lot of pieces that are kind of adjacent to our world, then it makes sense to reference things that people in that world would find funny, would also culturally understand. I mean, if you were building a fantasy world right now that overlaps with our own world, how in the world could you do that? Sorry, that was not intended to be a pun. Without having memes, without mentioning video games or Star Wars or anything that is just a part of our modern culture. Those elements feel like they almost have to be included in some capacity. And for me, when I'm world building, I try to include bits and pieces of that in how they would make sense for that world specifically. And so sometimes it's goofy things, it's phrases that make sense in the world. And sometimes it's things like this that are just, I find entertaining. There's a piece of this that makes sense in the world, and then there's a piece of this that is specifically done because anyone who's enjoying the world would find this hopefully entertaining and kind of goofy like I do. That's a weird aspect of world building that I don't engage with a whole lot, but maybe is one that should be thought about a little bit. The fact that, sometimes these worlds are made just for you, and sometimes they're made for other people. But regardless, if you're making the world just for you, you really, really should do things that make you laugh. Things that you find are goofy and kind of funny. And if you're making it for other people, I think you could make a similar case that if you are trying to build a world that's going to be engaging and entertaining for other people, then I think it makes sense to include some goofy, funny, ironic things that are just going to be things that your potential audience is going to grab onto. I'm thinking right now, because I'm rereading Lord of the Rings, as I do nearly constantly, because I'm me, that there's this scene where Merry and Pippin have been captured by the Uruk-hai, and they're being taken to Saruman. And in the books, right before the Rohirrim manage to overtake the orcs, and, Merry and Pippin go into Fangorn and meet Treebeard, one of the orcs grabs them and takes them away from the other folk. And Merry and Pippin kind of figure out that he knows about the ring and he's searching for it on their person. And one of them, I think it's Pippin, has the idea of impersonating Gollum so that he can indicate, we know about the ring, we have the ring, if you cooperate with us, if you help us out here, then we'll, make sure that we either put in a good word or we'll give it to you. And That's humorous when you think about the fact that Merry and Pippin have never met Gollum. And so, in order to do the impression, in order to make this orc understand what they're talking about, they are having to redo the impression that Bilbo must have done over the years from his own stories so well that an orc who likely hasn't met Gollum either recognizes it, which means that you have potentially all these hobbits and orcs over Middle Earth who are doing Gollum impressions in order to communicate what this funny creature is. There's also just so many funny Gollum moments. You know, one point when Sam is complaining about how much everybody stinks, Gollum's like, yeah, and you stink too, Sam. And, you know, those elements are things that you could easily and maybe accidentally leave out if you were trying to make your world totally serious. And I can certainly understand that propensity, like that draw. But the reality is no world is entirely serious. Obviously, if you're concocting a virtual world, a fictional world is really what I meant there, where you are in control of everything, you can create a world that is totally serious and has no jest. And I think maybe if you're going for something fairly literary, you could do that in a way where it kind of makes sense. But most of the time, I feel like that's not very realistic, and it doesn't sound like a joyful thing to write. It sounds like something that would be really like kind of hard on your spirit to spend a lot of time with. And so I think that including some goofy things here and there is just not only realistic and will make your world feel a little bit more lived in, but it also is just kind of fun. And so we come back to this pack snail, which makes very little sense. I mean, maybe the snails are faster in this world. I don't know. Or, from my perspective, as I was kind of chewing on it and thinking about it, it's like this would probably not be a bad thing if it's used in a sense where how quickly the goods get there doesn't really matter. It's just like, yeah, just like put it on the snail, and maybe it's like a homing pigeon kind of thing. Like the snail knows where to go, and the snail will get there eventually. Like nobody ever worries. Like snails always arrive wherever they were setting out. But it's like, or maybe you set it up and arrange it where you know exactly how fast the snails move, and so you set up this thing where I'm sending the snail now. I'm going to spend 3 more days here, and by the time I get where I'm going, the snail will already be there. I don't know. Not everything has to make perfect sense, but I thought this guy was entertaining, and so I have put him in. This is also another good point for, not point as in like I'm making a point, but point like awarded for doing art alongside your world building and your writing, because this is something that I probably would not have come to if I wasn't making art to go with all of this. If I was just writing, I wouldn't necessarily come up with the idea of a snail, a pack snail. But this is something that as I was making the other critters and thinking about aquatic animals that I could exaggerate and play with on this set of islands, I came up with the crabs, and then I came up with the turtle, and I'm like, oh, this is goofy, and I like this. I think there's a good case to be made that those kinds of things don't happen if you're not giving yourself the opportunity to actually play with those pieces. And I do think it's really important if you are world building in any sense. I think you should be doing the writing and you should be doing the drawing. Even if you're an awful drawer. I actually talked to a friend of mine who is writing a fantasy novel right now, and he was describing some really intriguing things. And I just asked him, because I'm me, like, hey, have you ever drawn this? I mean, even if it was just a really poor drawing, have you ever like found photos that you could use as reference material for this, or have you ever drawn it? And I think he said he hadn't, because I imagine if he had, I would have been like, I would really like to see that. But I think for a lot of people who are not particularly artistic, that's not something that occurs to them. They're like, I'm a writer, I'm a whatever. And they do the thing that they're kind of comfortable with. But even if you're not a very good artist, I would really encourage you to try your hand at just a little bit of art when it comes to world building, because man, it is such a beneficial thing. If you look at The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, there's so many drawings in there, and Tolkien made tons and tons of drawings having to do with his works. But here's something I don't know the answer to. And if you do, I would love for you to share it in the comments below. Did Tolkien start making his art prior to that? Or did he start making art because he needed to have art in his stories? I do not know the answer to that. If anybody wants to look it up, or if anybody knows the answer, I would love to hear it, because that would be a really fascinating thing to know and to understand. I think it's a worthwhile reason, though, to get into art all by itself. If you like telling stories, if you want to build things out, then I think that working with some form of drawing is going to be really, really good for you. But let's go back to these goofy creatures. I think that there's a lot to be said for the kinds of animals and creatures you have in your world. Often say as much as anything else does. I mean, if we really think about Dune, for example, would Dune be Dune in any capacity if it wasn't for the sandworms? And ironically, like, Dune doesn't have a lot of other creatures, at least the first couple books don't, to my knowledge. It's mostly the sandworms. But if you remove the sandworms from Dune, it's not really Dune anymore, is it? And if you think about The Hobbit, you know, it's the goblins and the orcs and the trolls and the wargs, the throwaway mention of the wereworms, and you've got the giant eagles, and you've got you've got Smaug, obviously. You've got all these creatures that are like integral, absolutely integral parts of how that world functions. And the creatures are often this way. The creatures often tell you a ton about the world that you're investing time into. If you think about Star Wars, I think one of the really cool and maybe like one of the best world building elements is that wherever you turn, there are new creatures. Right off the bat, you know, when you get to Tatooine, you get Jawas, and you get the Sand People, you get that giant skeleton of the Krayt dragon that's in the background. And then when you get into Mos Eisley, you get all of these weird alien-looking creatures, a lot of whom were just like costumes that they raided from other things that existed in Hollywood, I think. And then you get Chewbacca as this main character, who is obviously a beastie. He's, you know, some kind of like Yeti type thing. And, you know, you just keep getting more and more and more. It's really one of those things that makes it so believable. When you get to the prequel trilogy, oh my goodness, with all of the stuff underwater, with the Gungans and how they function. You know, I think you could make a case too that the robots are kind of, they fulfill that same role of being a beastie. And the robots in Star Wars tell us so much and world build so much. Again, they do a ton in the original trilogy with C-3PO and R2-D2, obviously. But I think that when you get to the droid armies of the Trade Federation in the prequel trilogy, you actually have that at a much higher level. You know so much about this military-industrial complex based on the kinds of things these people are using. And I find that just absolutely fascinating, and it makes the world so interesting and rich. And there's just a lot to be said for that kind of stuff. I find it so cool and so fun. But the beasties, the animals that you construct and use, tell you so much. I think one of the things that a lot of people really enjoyed about the Avatar films was the fact that there's so many interesting creatures on Pandora. Though it's actually one of the things that drove me nuts about the film, because the animal biology seems so odd. The way that all of the creatures have 6 limbs, but the Na'vi do not. The way that all the creatures also have 4 eyes, and then the Na'vi do not. And then this integration. which would be fine. That would be totally fine to have divergent evolutionary trains, but to then also have the ability for them to link up with that like cerebral connection, that seemed very hard for me to believe. When we're looking at how that world must have come into existence, it just doesn't seem particularly believable that you would have these creatures that would develop simultaneously, but not evidently on the same path, and would still be able to merge / combine their consciousness in that way. That just did not feel believable to me. Is that one of those things that like I tell normal folk and they're like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Like, you know, it's an oversight. Get over it. It's like, yeah, but it's like, it's world building, and I really enjoy good world building, and that was not an example of good world building. Whereas I think Star Wars honestly has some amazing world building. And I'm still getting over the fact that so much of it was dismissed when Disney bought the property. There were so many intriguing things in that world that no longer exist. I don't really know what else to do with this guy. I think I'm kind of done. Maybe I'll do some more shading on some of these darker portions down here, but yeah, I'm going to go back to the point I was kind of making at the start of this, which is I think that creature design is one of those things that is worth investing time in. And I think another reason that it can be a really good way to invest your time is that it's a lot less stressful than working on character design. Characters are hard. And I have a video actually I'm planning on doing here that I'm a little bit scared to do because I kind of don't trust my own skill in this. But I want to do a video on why, you know, it's so hard to draw your characters. You know, part of the crux of that is essentially we get far more emotionally attached to characters than we do a lot of other things. You know, characters that you've designed or written about in your stories, we're often very much bound to those. And so we don't want to risk illustrating them poorly. And so a lot of times we just don't illustrate them at all. But on that same premise, creatures are often way less stressful. Like, you're probably not as bound to the idea of one of your creatures as you are to one of your characters. And so if something goes awry with the drawing of a creature, if one of these crabs didn't turn out particularly well, like, maybe it's a little bit of a bummer, but not really that big a deal. Like, maybe a little bit of wasted time, but like, oh well, that's not so bad. But if I was to draw some of the characters from my book and they go poorly, like, I have an emotional reaction to that. And I am not a particularly emotional person, but I have a reaction to that kind of stuff. I want those characters to look good. I want to feel like I'm bringing them into the world, like they're coming into their own, like they're being made alive. And I struggle with that. Creatures, on the other hand, very seldom have that same level of emotional connection. And that doesn't mean that you should avoid the hard stuff. That is not what I'm saying at all. I think that if you really want to bring characters to life, even though it is hard, you should dedicate time to it. What I am saying is that in your world building project, in drawing in general, I think starting with beasties is a good place to start because they are a little bit less emotionally bound. So you can start with something like this. And then once you get a little bit more comfortable, you can come back and you can start working on things that are a little bit more emotionally charged, things that might be a little bit more stressful for you. And that's half the battle. So much of the battle with art is just staying in it long enough for your skills to develop. I continue to see people here on this platform commenting on my videos and on the videos of others about how they gave art a try and they just don't have the talent, that they couldn't make it work, that people will chime in on things and be like, no, like it's just all about talent. Like, if you are not born with the skill to be an artist, then you're not an artist. And I hate that mentality because I firmly don't believe it's true. I find it insulting, and I honestly had a lot of conversations with parents and other teachers when I was teaching full-time about this. In particular, when you get parents who were dismissive or other people who were dismissive about a student who, had obviously worked very, very hard to gain the skills that they had. And then you get somebody who would come up and say, like, oh, like, it must be nice, or you're lucky to be so talented. And I would generally stop the conversation at that moment and just be like, no, 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 no. He's practiced a lot. She's put a lot of time into this. Like, they have tried very, very hard. They didn't wake up one morning and go, I guess I'll try art. And all of a sudden, like, wow, I'm amazing. Does that happen on occasion? Yes, it does. I taught somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 1,500 students over the 10 years that I was teaching in the public schools. And in that time, I think I saw one, maybe two students that was the case for. What is far more often the case is people that haven't put a lot of time in and they accelerate really, really quickly once they get into it. That does happen pretty frequently, where somebody hasn't put any time into art and they jump in, they take a class and their first couple projects turn out all right. And then all of a sudden they kind of catch on and they start growing really, really fast. That does happen, but that is not like latent skill that is just popping up. That's just, this is a person who understands the mechanisms for this by nature, and they're going to grow a little bit faster. Not everyone is going to learn how to do anything at the same pace, and there are people who have a predisposition that is going to make it easier for them. But at the end of the day, it's something that is going to have to be developed. You're going to have to continue working in order to develop that skill. All of that to say that if you find it stressful to work on drawing out your characters because you really don't want them to go poorly, start with something like creatures. And what you will actually be doing the entire time as well is you're working on your just basic artistic skills. How to show form, how to articulate something from your mind onto the page, how to show shading, how to show light sources and lights and darks. All of those skills are fully transferable. And as you continue to work with them, you will get better and better. And those things will transfer when you decide to jump over to the stuff that you really, really want to do that is stressful and difficult. And there's no shame in that, no dishonor in that. It takes a long time. I do think that anyone that wants to learn how to draw can learn how to draw. That is not the same as saying it's easy, it's going to happen overnight, or that it's worth doing for every single person. I do not think that it is something that everyone should do. I think there's a lot of people that the sheer quantity of time that it would take them to get to the level of skill that they want to be at is just not going to be worth the struggle. But that shouldn't fill you with a hopelessness or dismay. We're all different. And there's a lot of awesome beauty in that. But I would just be lying if I told you that everyone's going to have the same path towards something. For me, I find that so many of these kinds of drawings are just easier for me to focus on. For me, so much of the struggle is getting in the art. Once I've started making something, it's not that hard for me to keep at it. But I have to dismantle some of the stress so that I can basically grab the motivation that I have and do something with it. I'm always motivated to make art. And if the art that I'm making is very simple stuff, then it doesn't take much to push myself into it. But there is a lot of artwork that I need to do, that I'm committed to doing, that is really stressful for me until I'm 15, 20 minutes into it. A lot of the painting that I do feels like running my hands through sandpaper in order to get started. I am not always able to work through that motivation and dive in when I need to. Sometimes it's like pulling hair or pulling nails in order to get into the work that I need to do. And I would wager that some of you have experienced that too. I don't think people talk about it a ton because it feels a little bit embarrassing, but if that's you, I just want you to know that's not that odd. That art is this strange, beautiful, creative, tormenting thing. And not for everybody. there are plenty of people who make art solely because they enjoy it. And I am so happy and maybe mildly jealous because for me, it is not always that way. It's always worth it, but there are certainly times where it is incredibly difficult on my psyche to get into the art making process. And I feel like all the time, what I'm trying to do is find strategies to make that gap easier to spam. So it's easier for me to jump into the art. So it's easier for me to get to work. I like this guy. He's coming out cool. I had not planned on coloring him, but I kind of like him. I had done these drawings a very long time ago and wasn't like ever thinking I was going to come back and work on them. But man, I am glad I did. I like this guy. I am definitely going to have to write a short story about the little hermit that lives on this. I'm gonna have to think about like how does life work for this guy? Like, what's the name of the crab? Did he befriend the crab? Is the crab mostly domesticated? Like, how does this relationship work? And again, like how you handle your beasties in your story tells a lot about your world. I'm gonna go on this little scorpion guy here too because I like him. I think I'm gonna use this weird crab scorpion guy to be not the mascot, but on the flag or the banner for this particular set of islands. So I'm thinking about him being a pretty tenacious creature. Maybe they're really well known for how hardy they are or something. And so they can be used perhaps as a slang term for the people that live here. Like, we are whatever this thing is, and that is something we identify with because they're tough and we too are tough. I know that there is a slang saying in Israel, I believe, where they call themselves essentially like it's a cactus or a cactus fruit of some kind, and it's something that's sweet on the inside but tough on the outside. And it's that same kind of idea, like adopting something as a term of endearment for yourselves that only really locals would understand. And again, these things, these ideas only come up because I'm simultaneously working on the writing and the world building, and because I have allowed myself some time to focus on what you might think of as being unimportant things. The beasties, the creatures. Working on the creatures in your world, I think, is super important. And come on, who doesn't love drawing creepy things? Like, they're so much fun. It's so much fun to work on things that are just like a little bit offbeat, you know. Is that you too? I mean, are you one of those artists like myself who, you know, drawing things that maybe made people a little bit uncomfortable when you were younger was like maybe part of the fun of it? I don't think that's a particularly weird artistic trait. I think a lot of us do that. A lot of us are like, yeah, you know, I'm gonna draw like this violent thing or this weird thing or this jokey comic or whatever. You know, I'm not doing a lot of that kind of stuff nowadays, obviously, but when I was younger, you know, there was certainly this idea of like, let's draw something that's a little bit provocative to whoever's in charge. And yeah, I think that's part of the game. Part of the game of being an artist is pushing the boundaries just a little bit. It's always been the case for us as a people group. Gotta push the boundaries just a little bit over the years and over the ages. But I'm kind of wrapping this guy up. And yeah, if you are still here, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. I'd love to hear from you about your beasties. And if you haven't gotten a chance to check out the Discord server and see some of the artists that are on there and the world building stuff and other stuff that they work on, that would be a really cool thing to do. The reason that I mention the Discord server in most of my videos is the fact that it's super important for us as artists to have some manner of community. And I found that it gets pretty hard to have a community unless you're intentional about it when you get older. Some of you might still be in school, and so you might have an easier time forming that community, but there's a lot of artists who listen to these videos, who watch stuff online, who are more like my age. You know, I am getting close to 40 years old. And so finding a community at my age is harder. You have to be intentional about these things. That's the whole reason that we built up the Discord server in the first place. It makes me no money. It is literally there as a community to benefit any of you. It is obviously a little bit of a benefit to me too. It's nice to be able to run my ideas by people, to ask people things. But at the end of the day, like, it's something that exists there for the community, because I think that there's just such a benefit to that world, such a benefit to having some artistic community. I love these acrylic markers too. They're so cool. I mean, it just feels like it brings things to life when you get a drawing that's slowly gotten desaturated over time, and then you can come back on and put some white on there. I've got other colors too, which also would work well for these, but mostly I just keep the white one around. It seems to be the most important. But yeah, thanks for being here. And thinking of my patrons as well. If you want to check out the Patreon, it is linked in the description down below. Have a good one. Happy world building. Go make some beasties. Make some cool, crazy, maybe creepy, maybe provocative things. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.